There's an important topic I want to philosophize on, and this is a very serious matter. It's a very existentializing matter, and if you're not a man, you don't have these male sex parts and physical surrounds, or a gender identity as a male, which is a psychological component, which has associated physicalities to it, but is not necessarily totally congruent with sex. So there are some discrepancies, but generally speaking, sex tends to govern physical surroundings of the body, forming certain specified constituencies that influence psychological mind and dynamical information processes in the body that have some significant influence on our ways of engaging in our interests and our individually different subjectivities and our subjective embodier. But again, these are explainable by proportioned distinctions in which most of the individual... No, I'm good, thank you, I appreciate that. Most of the individual has various component working operational distinct parts with a set of properties and characteristics, including genes, by the way, that are the same or shared across individuals and have an approximation of a particular set of information that is the same within a model that has also individually different sets of information that are established that way due to the nature of physical existence and the nature of mind, which has to do two things. It has to create and process novelty and dynamic association to the physical surrounds in order to be able to proliferate its own existence, but also to extend its most important, valuable, and the goodest information it has into the future for the purposes of generating more positive qualia. And not so much subjective experience, but setting up that subjective experience for the best possible, most awesome experiences you can imagine. And also for love. For the love of it. For the love of living and the continuity of existence and of truth, ultimate truth. Particularly as it pertains to the grandeurs within the next upcoming dawn of our existence, or dusk, depending on how you prefer to operate and function and what you love and find interesting. And that can pertain to a whole sensorium of qualia that can have these ill qualities or positive qualities, kind qualities, kind in which shows us compassion within our minds, not necessarily always originating from the environment, but sometimes directly from our own environments as ourselves in our minds, or even from feedback from others or how others express themselves in relation to us, and how we affectively feel or even emotionally experience that interaction within a particular physical surrounds. And what seems to be most important is whether or not you love it, not whether or not it's true, it's actual, whether or not somebody loves you, even though that can be very meaningful and purposeful. That's not what's most important to sustaining a meaningful existence. Is whether or not you love it. Like, do you love to be alive? Do you love what you do? Do you love certain aspects of your being? Because if you love nothing, not someone per se, but literally just nothing, just you need to love something. And that typically tends to be bound to your interests. And even the people we love, we're interested in them immensely. We can't get them off our minds. So where does your consciousness go? It typically goes in the direction to which has these optimistic grandeurs associated with what we love. and what we invest most of our time and energy and are willing to exert effort necessary and also drain ourselves of resources to the point of exhaustion and even illness and disorder, with the optimism that we'll be better and be able to enjoy the positive fruits of the wellsprings of qualia direct to the cultivating and working of the physicalities in terms of its land and our technological capacities that extend from the internal processes of the mind through our physical expressions and behaviors, extending the functionalities of our nervous systems and the nervous system itself to these unique configurations that are not necessarily part of our bodies but have these unique properties of tools, in which some people love tools, and at times I love tools even because of what they do and how they make me feel and the meaning that's in there, the meaning that has purposes and purposing is associated with that, which typically tends to be directed towards what I'm currently interested in or other people are currently interested in if it pertains directly to their conscious. And that tends to be related to loving it. Loving it in terms of what we find intrinsically meaningful and produces these great qualia of experience and states that really tend to get us to move in a particular purposeful course in which we form more of these associativities, not just internally within ourselves, but definitely modeled within ourselves, and more integratedly so, but with our physical surroundings, in which we develop our, ironically, autonomy and separation from things. And we become more mobile, able to do different and innovative things as we explore our individually different avenues of interest and what we love, our passions. And the more time we invest and energy we exert, we can produce these unique and creative projects that are priceless in some degree through our self-expressions and kindlings of our spirit that come from the kinder qualia of what it's like to be able to engage in something that we genuinely find worthwhile, meaningful, and even can invoke a sense of awesome. This is great. This is fantastic. And I know that I could have never have possibly done this if I hadn't actually done anything to do this. And I did. And it feels great. Because you engaged in a process with what you loved and what you found interesting. And that led you somewhere. Not necessarily a place that, say, had all these dandy, pleasant, even romantic experiences in it, or what is often in our culture and through the word of mouth of others idealized, but rather a grander narrative and engagement in that story that's not necessarily a story, but more of an enterprise of our existence in which we can tell more meaningful and interesting stories almost near sudden. Because, every time we're asked or we set a new word to page, there's an opportunity to reorient our perspectives and learn something of the past in regards to our own experience that deepens that loving and interest through a dynamical telling of our stories and our narratives, our personal narratives, that are not so much about the words, but about the tale, or the, more in particular, the legends that came from our loves and our interests in things, material things, or the subject matters that captivate and pull us in a particular direction, or, any possible qualia. Any possible qualia of your direct experience that becomes of interest, which engages you and immerses all your emotions and your affects and your cognitions, that produce more of these positive, functional structures of thinking and thought that is oriented towards getting more to that objective meaningfulness and purposefulness, not one that is always thought, but which is predominantly emotionally, affectively experienced, in which literally forms and directly forms real meaningful processes, psychological processes that are true, psychologically true, subjectively and objectively bound through the instantiations and subsequent substantiations of information within our nervous system that have these physical and corresponding psychological structures that have to be a certain way, forming parallelisms of the exact same category of representation or similar modelings of representation that form the psychological and ultimately allow us to do or operate in any way, shape, or form in the physical surrounds through what's incorporeal. Psychological processes being predominantly incorporeal, but having a corporeal direct association, otherwise it couldn't communicate or process information at all. So there has to be some sort of interaction between the corporeal, which has to do with the bodily and the physical surrounds, but also the incorporeal to deal with consciousness and various subjective processes, information processes, any sort of information processes. And that includes extended processes that pertain to our information processing in regards to our physical surrounds, that interpret the meaning of symbols and representations from structures, and often structures that we've innovated around, such as computers and technologies that we've manufactured to be able to extend the functionalities of the mind through the physical surrounds, and understanding and harnessing the laws and dynamics of the physical, of the material, of things, and giving it more substance, material substance, but also infusing our incorporealities that exist at every cell level and constituency, forming tissues, organs, and systems of organs into entire individuals with a higher or more emergent consciousness, particularly a psychological mind that is distinct from the information processing occurring at a lower and more primitive level from cells and tissues and nervous systems that have a very distinct way of processing information that is not the same as the psychological, but pertains more to the biological, and the structures that more directly support and maintain the survival of life, not necessarily this love, this orientation towards the grander and the creative, innovative possibilities, but rather that are merely set on what's optimistically optimizing for that particular unit in its specified operation for us as individuals with this higher order capacity, in which those cells are not necessarily independent cells, but tend to be these basic former structures that have developed over time and once were independent, and maybe even independent minds with thoughts, but for whatever reason have been shaped through a deepening process of evolution that allows for these dual or even multi-configurations of psychological processing pertaining to biological systems that have lower order, more basic processings of information and autonomy. All levels of analysis express and demonstrate autonomy and some sort of subjectivity, but the character of the self seems to emerge uniquely in human beings. And even as we get to animals, there are these distinctions in terms of recognizing movement and embodying movement and various unique authentic forms of perceptions, and more importantly, a cognizant purposing of things, finding the utilities of behaviors within the self. And at times, certain animals like primates even extend that purposing to physical objects or things, and can develop and conceive of the category of tools, which allows us to form unique extensions of the body and behavior dynamical to the physical surrounds and environment that forms an alternate and new aspect of both the environment and the individual that has more of this temporaneous category that is less stable and consistent than the user of the tool, but also typically the physical surrounds and setting in which that tool or object is made or constructed or interacted with. And you can think of that as being in a forest and finding a stick and then using that stick to get at food, maybe termites in a hole, like a lot of chimpanzees do. And that doesn't mean that the forest suddenly disappears when the stick is picked up. Only an aspect of the forest no longer is a forest, but is a tool for the ape. And then when the ape lets go of that tool, it returns back to the environment with distinctive properties. And almost all of this pertains to this emotional experience, is very similar to just loving it or being interested in something, and which is generally positive and meaningful, but most importantly is bound to our internal crave for purposefulness and a deep sense of purpose that tends to be intimately connected with love and interest and a deepening sense of what's meaningful, but also which brings us closer to what's not necessarily just objectively true or just subjectively true, but ultimately subjectively and objectively true in relation to ultimate psychological truths regarding our own existence and the existence of pretty much only the things that we love or deem interesting and valuable and necessary for our existence. Because we don't tend to be perfect individuals who even have the capacity to love everything, and nor should we try to extend our emotions to domains where they might be incongruent and don't apply, but rather we should find honest, earnest, and fair alignments. And this can actually paradoxically open us up to love what we may have not loved before, or even develop a sort of love that at the general level appreciates and recognizes and takes great pleasure and ecstasy in all things and a connectedness to all things. This is more endowed within a sense of spirituality, not just a sense of spirituality, an alignment of spirituality with an emotional experience, an emotional affective experience that can be transformative and ultimately is a form of direct enlightenment and awakening that is momentary and pertains to that qualia, that qualitative state of experience or engaging in the world. And the more that we can tap into that genuine spirituality that orients us towards a meaningful purpose that is aligned with good conscience, not just a subjective good conscience, but a good conscience that actually is oriented to the more objective physical truths that tend to promote optimal health, optimal psychological functioning, and more meaningfulness and purposefulness to individual existences. And that can extend and start from the self and not necessarily have to even concern itself with extending to others, but certainly can, and that would be even better and great in some variety of situations and circumstances, not always, but it tends to be generally radiant and positive to the future and contributes to these great innovations and directly to the sustainability of civilization and its well-being, the well-being of all individuals who tend to prosper from that example and the radiance of such that make things better, and even our own existence as it returns back to us in this kind and beautiful, spiritual and enlightening manner.